Hi everybody, today I am going to talk about my top ranked memoirs of 2024. The list didn't quite make it to 24 memoirs, but it came pretty close, and I'm also going to be talking about my winter 2025 TBR for memoirs and nonfiction. Let me just get my document up. Hang on just a minute. All right, so there are two memoirs that I have reviewed in a previous video that I want to mention first so I can redirect you guys to the video that I mentioned it in. So for Nonfiction November, I did a subset TBR from Olive's recommendations that focused on substance use disorder. There were two memoirs in this TBR that I focused on mainly, and they were Scenes from My Life by Michael K. Williams and, of course, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry. For those reviews, please direct your focus to my Nonfiction November video, which will be in the description box. At number 2 on my top memoirs list of 2024 is called Homework. So Julie Andrews has a set of 3 memoirs, Homework, and then I haven't read the third one yet, and I can't remember what it's called, but Homework is basically her story of her experiences in Camelot, The Sound of Music, and Mary Poppins. And Mary Poppins has recently celebrated its 60th anniversary in honor of the Sherman brothers, who have both passed away. That special was on during Thanksgiving, and I always love seeing Mary Poppins because it's one of my favorite Disney classics, and I have been in the musical at this Amato Center in 2015 when I was in the ensemble for her Jolly Holiday and Let's Go Fly a Kite. So I really liked the behind the scenes tidbits in Homework for Mary Poppins, and oh my god, Mary Poppins and the Sound of Music. And she also talked about Camelot and My Fair Lady. And I have not even seen Camelot before, so after reading the book, I really want to see the movie because I've never heard of it. But The Sound of Music has always been one of my favorite musical movies. The next movie I wanted to talk about is Finding You by Viola Davis. So when I rank these memoirs, they usually get a subjective ranking of 4 stars or 4.5 stars because I like the way each person who is talking about their lives brings you into their lives and tell them about how they grew up. Viola Davis was on the show How to Get Away with Murder. And I also read Kerri Washington's memoir earlier this year, too. She was on Scandal. And those were 2 shows that were on in the early to mid-2010s that I really liked watching on TV. Viola Davis, really, I loved learning about her because she has been one of my favorite actresses in the recent years. The next book I wanted to talk about is Woman of Interest by Tracy O'Neill. I have a personal connection to this author because Tracy graduated from high school with me. This year was my 20th reunion. I missed seeing her at the reunion, but as a fan of thriller and mystery books, I really love the fact that this memoir kind of took the center focus of a detective novel. So Tracy was adopted, and during the pandemic, she went to Korea, where she was originally from, to try to track down her mother and her mother's side of her birth mother and her mother's side of the family. So I really loved learning more about where she grew up and what country she was from and her culture. Because, I mean, Tracy and I were not exactly close friends. We knew each other through other people. But I remember when we were in school together, one thing she always used to talk about was her ice skating competitions. And I always admired her. I never actually saw her ice skate, but I remember one time when we had to write an essay for English class in 7th grade. She wrote an essay about one of her figure skating competitions that she did, and she bought in a medal that she had. And I just really loved hearing her tell her story about how much figure skating meant to her. So, Tracy, congratulations on your memoir. It was awesome. The next memoir I wanted to talk about is Grief is for People by Sloane Crosley. This book is by a woman who is really close to one of her college professors, and it basically tells a story about how she grieved the loss of this professor that she was really close to when she died. And it's a really interesting retrospect on grief, and I highly recommend it, especially as I was able to connect to this writer because, as I have mentioned, over the past 3 years, I have gone through a lot of grief in my life, personally, with losing coworkers from Gateways and Plus Company, losing my coworker from the Boys and Girls Club in Portland, losing family members before and during COVID, and Matthew Perry passing away. The next memoir I wanted to talk about is The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop. I reviewed this memoir in my video where I talk about my TBR for Friends and Gilmore Girls books. And as I mentioned in that review, the thing I liked learning the most about Kelly Bishop was the fact that she was on Broadway and originated the role of Sheila in A Chorus Line. She is one of the main characters in the song At the Ballet, for those of you who are not familiar with A Chorus Line. There are 2 other characters who are the focus of that song. I think one of them is Cassie and one of them is Maggie, if I have that right. If I have that wrong, correct me in the comments, please. But I'm pretty sure that's right. The next memoir I wanted to mention today is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. So this memoir was really powerful because it is the first-hand account of a person named Chanel Miller who was the victim of a rape in 2012 at a college in Virginia. And the most powerful part of this memoir for me was reading her victim statement from when she went to court to talk against the guy who raped her to try to get him convicted. Not very many books make me cry, but this one definitely almost did for that reason alone. And other memoirs that I have read this year have made me cry too for different reasons. The next memoir I wanted to talk about is Crying in H Might by Michelle Zoner. This memoir is by the lead singer of the indie pop band Japanese Breakfast, who I actually have never heard any of the music from before. So if you listen to them, leave your favorite song in the comments so I can listen to it. This is about her relationship with her mother as she was dying from cancer. And the interesting thing about this memoir is how, her relationship with her mother was tied to her Korean heritage. And I really loved learning about the different food that is related to that culture, because it's a culture I don't know much about. So I don't know if any of you watch Gilmore Girls, but my favorite character on Gilmore Girls is Rory's best friend Lane, and she's Korean. and she's in a band too. So when I was reading this book, I really connected the relationship, the mother-daughter dynamic relationship, to Mrs. Kim and Lane. But I didn't think that Michelle Stoner's mother was as strict as Mrs. Kim. The next memoir I wanted to talk about is You Never Know by Tom Selleck. So much like the Julie Andrews memoir I talked about a couple of minutes ago, the thing that I really liked about this memoir was, so for those of you who do not know, Tom Selleck played Monica's boyfriend, Richard, on Friends. So that's the main reason why I picked this book up. But he doesn't really talk about Friends a lot in his book, like Matthew Perry did in his memoir. He mostly gives behind-the-scenes tidbits about Magnum P.I. and the filming of that show. And also the movie Three Men and a Baby, which starred alongside him Ted Danson from Cheers and Steve Guttenberg. And I really love the behind-the-scenes snippets from those TV shows. As I said at the beginning of the video, for my review of Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, please watch my Nonfiction November video where I talk about that book. The next book that I wanted to talk about is Making a Scene by Constance Wu. This memoir was recommended to me with Cindy, and it is the memoir of one of the actresses from the show Fresh Off the Boat, which was on in the mid to late 2000s, and she was the victim of much scrutiny recently because she had heard news that she was going to be doing a different TV show from Fresh Off the Boat, and she posted it on Twitter like right before season 4 of Fresh Off the Boat was supposed to start or something. That was mentioned in the book, and that kind of made me mad that she did that because it was so disrespectful to her co-stars from Fresh Off the Boat, and it was rude of her. The next book is Hello, Molly by Molly Shannon. The title of this memoir is obviously a spin-off reference to the musical Hello, Dolly. Molly Shannon is a sketch artist on Saturday Night Live, most well known from her character in the 90s, Mary Kathleen Gallagher, and the movie Superstar. And I really liked the behind-the-scenes snippets that she gives of Saturday Night Live and what filming the show is like. And at the end of the book, she has a really sweet scene with her kids and them asking her if she's happy. And then that was just so adorable. I loved it. The next memoir I wanted to mention is Educated by Tara Westover. Much like Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, this memoir was a reread. I originally read this in 2021 during COVID-19 lockdown, and it is about a girl who grew up Mormon in a very strictly religious family, and basically she was homeschooled her whole life, and it's her coming-of-age story about how she gets an education for herself and gets out of the abusive and controlling situation that her family has her under. And I learned a lot about the Mormon religion through this book that I never really knew. The next book I wanted to talk about is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I read this for my Reading the Rainbow Book Club in October at Print Bookstore, and it is basically a story about a relationship that is abusive with a dream house as a main character being used as a framing device to describe like how the relationship starts out and how it eventually goes downhill and falls apart. Her writing is lyrical and powerful, and it really grabs you from the very beginning, which is what I love about it. The immersion is great. The next book is Hey Kiddo by Jared Krozes. We're just going to call this guy Jared K because I do not know how to say his last name and pronounce it properly. So this book is about a kid who grew up with this is a graphic novel about a kid who grew up in an alcoholic home and basically had to go live with his grandparents for all of his childhood and formative years because his father was abusive. And I really loved how his relationship with his grandparents was. It was very cute and very sweet. And it reminded me of my relationship with my grandparents who have passed away. They are all gone now. They died in 2014, 2015, 2019, and 2020, and 21 respectively. The next book is Be My Guest by Priya Basil. This is a memoir that is a series of essays about how to be a good hostess when you have a party at your house, and I really hope to implement this into my everyday life if I want to have parties at my apartment in 2025. The next book I wanted to talk about is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This book is about a sketch artist from Saturday Night Live who was the host of The Daily Show, and he talks about how he grew up in South Africa during apartheid, and this was like an area of history that we learned about in school, but it's really interesting to hear about it from a person who actually grew up during it because he was multiracial. He was born to a black mom and a white father, which was a crime back then, hence the title of the book, Born a Crime. And he talks about his relationship with his mom in this book, and that's really sweet. The next book I want to talk about is The Hard Part by Oksana Masters. This book is about a Paralympian who was disabled because she was affected by the Chernobyl explosion, and it talks about like what happened during the explosion, how it affected her, and her inspirational story of being a Paralympian. The next book that I want to talk about is Beautiful Boy. This was also reviewed in my Nonfiction November video, which will be linked in the description. So I'm not going to talk about it too much here. Just watch that video. I talk about that book and I talk about the movie as well. The next memoir I wanted to mention is An Actor's Life by Jenna Fisher. This is by the woman who played Pam Beasley on The Office. And it's basically a guide to how to break into your acting career and formulate a good resume and like tips for auditions. And as somebody who's going to probably be auditioning for plays later in the year once I get adjusted to my new job at Vertical Harvest, her tips are very, very helpful. At number 21 is A Comfort of Crows by Margaret Warnkel. This author basically observed nature from her window throughout the whole year, and basically these essays are about togetherness and family and how that connects to nature. And I'm going to be reviewing this book and possibly reading passages from it when I do my wrap-up for Reese's Book Club 2024 picks and my rankings for all those books that will be out at the end of January once I finish reading Reese's Book Club picks. The final memoir I wanted to talk about is Killers of the Flower Moon by David Gran. I read this book in the springtime, and it's about the murders of a Native American tribe in Oklahoma that happened in the 1900s. And the author actually went to the area in Oklahoma where these Native Americans live and interviewed current people who lived on a reservation about how this murder has affected them. And that was really interesting and informative. It's also very sad and an emotional read. Olive reviewed this book on her channel in 2023, and she said she saw the movie and that the movie was not as good as the book. If you have seen the movie and would like to share your opinion, please leave a comment. So memoirs that I'm going to be reading next year are Garlic and Sapphires and Tender is the Bone by Ruth Rachel, who was a food columnist for the New York Times. The first book focuses on, like, her work for the New York Times and how she had to disguise herself to do restaurants and reviews, because she had a bad reputation for giving bad reviews. So this book reminds me of the episode of Friends where Monica writes the bad review for Alessandro's, and the guy who works at Alessandro's comes over to her apartment to, like, yell at her for the bad review, and then she ends up hiring her. And then the other book, Tender is the Bone, is basically a story about her childhood and how cooking inspired her to become a food critic. The next book that I want to talk about, that I want to read next year, is My Story by Elizabeth Smart. Elizabeth Smart was a girl who was kidnapped and held hostage in, like, 2005, and she was released, like, 10 or 15 years later. I feel like her release was very recent, but I can't remember exactly when it was. So basically, she tells about her story in captivity and how strong of a person it made her, and I can't really wait to read her book. The next book that I want to read is Brace for Impact by Gabe Monserrati. And this is basically this memoir is about how this author is in roller derby to deal with his abusive relationship. And I am pairing this reading up with my reread of I'm Glad My Mom Died when I reread it in March. The next book is Unprotected by Billy Porter. Billy Porter is a more recent Broadway performer who is gay, and he was in the Cinderella movie a couple of years ago on Amazon Prime that had Camila Cabello and Idina Menzel in it, which was not good. Do not watch that movie. It is not a good reinterpretation of Cinderella. Watch Rodgers and Hammerstein version, please. The next book is called Uncanny Valley by Alice Weiner, and this is about people who work in the tech area of Silicon Valley, so I'm interested to learn about that because I don't know much about technical stuff. The next memoir that I want to read next year is called Glass Castles by Jeanette Walls. I just read her historical fiction book, Hang the Moon, and I really, really enjoyed it. So, Glass Castles is kind of similar to I'm Glad My Mom Died because she talks about growing up with abusive and alcoholic parents. So I can't wait to read that and do a comparison of what Jeanette McCurdy experiences, and I'm Glad My Mom Died. The next memoir I'm going to be reading is called Wild by Cheryl Strayed. This has been reviewed by Gabby Reads and Olive at Book Olive, and it's about a woman who goes through a divorce, and to cope with her divorce, she goes on a hike on the Pacific Northwest Trail. So as somebody who likes to be out in nature and walk, I'm excited to read this book, and hopefully it will encourage me to focus more on my exercise goal this year. So I wanted to talk about my TBR for nonfiction for winter 2025. In January, I'm going to be reading the two Ruth Rachel books I was talking about, The Magical Language of Others by E.J. Coe, which I am going to be pairing up with my reread of Crying in H Mart, and Wild by Cheryl Strayed, which I'm buddy reading with Kathleen. For February, for Black History Month, I'm going to be reading Althea by Sally S. Jacobs and Hidden Figures, which is the book that the movie that came out in 2013 was based on. And then for sports nonfiction that I'm going to be reading closer to when March Madness is starting, I'm going to read Boomtown and Dear Black Girls. And my rereads for February will be Becoming, The Light We Carry, and The Third Gilmore Girl. And for March, my nonfiction TBR is going to be Brace for Impact and We Don't Know Ourselves. And I'm obviously going to be rereading I'm Glad My Mom Died. So what is on your nonfiction TBR for 2025? And are there any memoirs that you can recommend to me? Please leave them in the comments below. Thank you.